We are delighted to welcome you to the 15th Jaipur Literature Festival, protected by Dettol, Banega Swasth India. This session is presented by the Embassy of Ireland. It is our pleasure to present today Acts of Desperation, Megan Nolan in conversation with Elaine Canning. Megan Nolan's taut, provocative debut novel, Acts of Desperation, tells the story of all-consuming love, longing, and obsession, in the throes of which is a divided consciousness. In a kind of unflinching confession and critique, Nolan offers the reader reflection and revelation, a portrait of perhaps their own, and indeed inherently human dreams, desires, and insatiability. In conversation with writer Elaine Canning, Nolan discusses her literary debut and the convulsions of desire and desperation. Megan Nolan. Megan Nolan is a London-based Irish writer. Her writing includes essays, fiction, and reviews which have been published widely, including in the New York Times, the White Review, the Sunday Times, the Village Voice, the Guardian, and in the literary anthology Winter Papers. Regular columns of her cultural commentary appear in the New Statesman. Her debut novel, Acts of Desperation, was published by Jonathan Cape and Little Brown in 2021 and has now been sold in 13 languages. Elaine Canning. Elaine Canning is a writer, editor, and public engagement professional. She is currently head of special projects at Swansea University, which includes the Rhys Davies National Short Story Competition, as well as executive officer of the Dylan Thomas Prize. Canning has authored a monograph and papers on Spanish Golden Age drama, and her short stories have appeared in The Nation. She is also editor of Maggie O'Farrell Contemporary Critical Perspectives, and her debut novel, The Sandstone City, will be published by Adoran Press in 2022. Please feel free to send in your comments by typing them in the comments section. Do follow our social media handles to get notifications on the upcoming sessions. Please tweet using hashtag Jaipur Literature Festival 2022 and tag us at @Jaipur Litfest. Ladies and gentlemen, we present to you Acts of Desperation, Megan Nolan in conversation with Elaine Canning.
Hi Megan, how are you?
Hi Elaine, I'm very good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's so lovely to see you, and I'm delighted to be in conversation with you at the wonderful Jaipur Literature Festival. Thank you so much for talking to me today, and many congratulations on Acts of Desperation, your debut novel. And I also have to say many congratulations on being on the long list for the Swansea University Dylan Thomas Prize.
Thank you. I'm absolutely thrilled. It's made me very happy. Thank you.
Oh, that's so lovely to hear. Yeah, I thought to begin with, Megan, perhaps you might like to say a little bit about the premise of the book and when you started writing it and where you were when you began writing it.
Yeah. So I started work on Acts of Desperation about, I think it must be almost 5 years ago now. I was about 26 at the time, and I had gotten an arts bursary from an organisation in Ireland, or Waterford, where I'm from, called the Ted and Mary O'Regan Arts Fund, and it was something like I think it was like €1,400, and I lived in London and just thought, oh, that's class, about about 3 weeks in London, but if I go somewhere else, then I can make it last substantially and really get to work on something. So I decided to go abroad for a couple of months, and I went to sublet a friend's apartment in Greece, and then I started work on the book then over 3 months, and I sort of naively thought I would write the whole thing in those 3 months. But I got a reasonable, a good run at it, and that sort of gave me the confidence to keep on when I returned to London then. But it was over a long time. It was maybe 3 more years before I'd actually finished, because it was all just in my spare time.
Yeah. Yeah, and tell us about the book itself. Tell us about the premise of the book and the themes, the key themes within it.
So it's a book it's told from the perspective of an unnamed narrator who's a young woman in Dublin, and it's framed around her obsessive relationship with a man named Kieran that she meets at a sort of very pivotal time in her life where she feels herself to be disconnected from a lot of things, and she ends up sort of using this relationship as a means to anchor herself and give her life meaning, which means that she's then very extremely obsessed with its success. And Kieran is a very sort of cold and reserved and forbidding sort of a man, so he becomes sort of a project for her to work on, that he will eventually love her. But really the love story, even though it's ostensibly all about this sort of obsessive and quite dark love, I think the more time I spend away from it, and with the benefit of hindsight, for me it's sort of obvious now that it's really about this lack in her life, and the love story is almost incidental in a way. You know, it could have been any number of things that she settled on to get obsessed with, but as it happens, it's this particular man.
Sure. I was wondering whether, Megan, you could perhaps read a section from the book to give the audience a flavour of the tone and the voice.
Absolutely. I'll read a little bit. That's it comes about a quarter of the way into the book, and it's after an argument that Kieran and narrator, where it's revealed that he's still in touch with a particular ex-girlfriend of his who she has a huge fear and jealousy about. So yeah, this comes in the aftermath of that revelation and argument. When I was a child and my cat was hit by a speeding car that didn't stop, he lay out in the shed that night waiting to be buried. I crept out into the damp, mossy darkness after everyone was asleep and drew back the blanket he was beneath. I put my hand on his familiar ginger stomach, but of course it was wrong in every conceivable way. Freezing where it should have been warm, stiff as new cardboard where it should have been soft. Feeling this wrongness, I knew it was true at last and couldn't believe it. I kept on stroking and stroking him, making deals with God, thinking if I stand here all night, thinking maybe if I stroked the awful dead thing's stomach 1,000 times exactly, thinking, please, please God, send him back to me. Give him back to me. I won't stop asking you. I had been living in a constant bargain with Kieran for months. Every day that passed in which I was easy to be with and accommodating and a good girlfriend was a ritual offered up. My body expected the perseverance to mean something, and suddenly it was clear that my intentions were meaningless, and I could no more magic him into loving me than I could an animal back to life. When I looked back at him from my collapse, he had hardened. For God's sake, don't be a child, he hissed. There was a scrape as he pushed his stool back and moved past me. Wait, my mouth was saying instinctively. I wish I could step inside this memory, steady myself, put a cool hand on my own, and convince myself to wait, have another drink, calm down, go home. But my body was moving without thought, scurrying under the bar to gather my belongings, running outside onto the tram tracks, peering in both directions. I saw him walking quickly down past the National Museum. He was moving steadily, betraying no sign of the drunkenness from a moment before. I ran after him, feebly calling and grasping for his shoulder. He shook me off so violently that I stumbled backwards, and then I was crying and saying please over and over again. Kieran found crying repulsive. Whatever distaste he already felt for me during arguments, the sight of tears sharpened it. His eyes would narrow and lose any residual warmth or compassion. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think that gives us a wonderful insight into the desperation, the acts of desperation that is in the title of the novel, and also her perseverance and this obsession that you mentioned in terms of love. You know, she's absolutely saturated by it, isn't she? By this love for him. You know, and she also talks about whenever she falls in love, about it making everything new, including herself. So I wondered if you could say a little bit more about how her approach to love interconnects with her own identity and her own self-validation.
Yeah, I think as you bring up, because she feels this renewal when she falls in love, it does seem to be sort of the you know, the magic thing that is the only reliable way she's found to make herself feel valid again when she feels like nothing and feels worthless. To fall in love with somebody is to be, you know, recreated, because the way that they see you, the way each person sees us is individual, and is not, you know, objective reality. It's always going to be somebody else's perspective. So to have a new one applied to you, and one in which you're found, you know, in her case, she's obviously not sort of cherished by Kieran, but at least she's attractive. So I think that her ability to feel revalidated is completely tied up with being seen by a new person, and all the things that come with that. And also, I mean, it is, even though in her case it is obviously taken to an extreme degree, but it is quite a beautiful thing that when you fall in love with somebody, you know, it does change your perspective on pretty much everything, and it makes the world into a different place than it was before, you know. And that is genuinely a very beautiful thing that we should cherish in life. But it's just, when it comes to her, she doesn't have an already existing established sense of the world or of herself. So it's sort of dangerous then for it to be so you know, dependent on the whim of how another person exists with her.
Absolutely. And I mean, the narrator tells us herself that she needs to be around people, but whenever she is in love, you know, nothing else matters. That is the soul focus, and that's the driving force, isn't it? And the purpose of the everyday, not having to be with that person every day, but just having that person to love. I think that's the extreme sort of version of that we get is very, very apparent. You mentioned at the beginning that she's also nameless, which I find fascinating, given that we get so much of her. She gives us so much of herself in terms of her thoughts and her motivations. So I wondered, was she always without a name, and why did you decide to withhold her name?
Yeah, she was actually, and it wasn't a big willful choice at first. I just sort of didn't for a couple of chapters, and then I realized about 3 chapters in, I thought, oh God, I haven't actually used her name yet. I don't know what it is. And then I sort of ran through a few possibilities in my head, and they all just felt, I couldn't find one that didn't feel really fake and wrong for her. And then I thought, okay, well, why is that? That's interesting to stick with and to think about it for a minute. And then I sort of thought it through, and I realized that I liked her not having a name for two reasons, really. One is that I wanted the book to be, I mean, this is like maybe a bit divisive in terms of whether people enjoyed the book or not, but obviously it's very single-minded, and it doesn't have like a lot of world building in it, you know, like expansive world building. It's very much just this one story and her, this very particular time in her life. And I wanted that to be the case, and for it to not have that many roots outside of the story that it was telling. And the namelessness seemed to help that somehow, because I don't know, because it wasn't about her. I feel like she's so much more as a person than this story. The story was meant to be only about this love affair, you know, and I think it was easier to like feel her loss into this relationship, or like her disappearance into the relationship without a name. It felt like that was a way to sort of indicate how totally she had absorbed herself in this narrative, you know. And then also from a functional point of view for the reader, I always really liked the idea of creating quite an immersive condition for the reader to be engaging with the story, and I thought having it all, you know, so in the first person and so totally inside of her head, I thought not having a name is sort of an extra little way to feel that you are her when you're reading, you know, and to really get inside of her mind like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the intensity of her voice is you know, it's absolutely wonderful. That first person narrative, you are completely absorbed in the story, and you know, and you mentioned about making this voice fully immersive, making that experience for the reader fully immersive. How did you manage to create that style? You know, how did you manage to create it and sustain it throughout your novel? Was it a very difficult process, or was it something that came quite naturally once you began writing the story?
Yeah, it was quite natural. I think that the way I thought about it, because I'd done quite a lot of first person essay writing, and the style of those was different, obviously, but not entirely unrelated. And I think I started writing the novel in the same sort of style, but then realizing that the fact it was fiction meant that I could like totally let go of all the cautions that you have to employ with essay writing, and really and any sort of thought or impulse that you might have, you can like make them theatrical and exaggerate them and magnify them and really burrow into them in the novel. So I think it was like that. I thought of it as being like a way to that all these things that are like only ever passing thoughts or impulses in my actual life, but then the novel was a way to like express them 10 times and to make them into something else. So yeah, I think the style kind of came from that, basically trying to operate under the usual sort of confessional first person style that I was used to, but then making it into something a bit darker and more intense.
Sure. And the whole the darkness and the intensity, all of this focus is on Kieran and on this relationship with him, isn't it? Though there are other relationships, in the sort of on the sidelines, in the peripheries, but the central relationship is with this man, Kieran.
Yeah.
And she says herself, doesn't she, that she loved him darkly and wrongly. There is that acknowledgement of it in the story. But she also talks about that relationship, as I mentioned already, as a singularity, and about her blocking out everything else, friends, family, other concerns, and so on. Could you tell us a little bit more about that particular relationship with Kieran?
Yeah, I was thinking about it recently in terms of what you just referred to there, the singularity and how it sort of quiets out everything else. I was actually thinking about it over Christmas, how Christmas sort of operates like that for me in my head, is that no matter what troubles are in your life, I always am able to completely shut them out for 5 days at Christmas time when I'm with my family. And it's just like a sort of bargain that I've made within myself that, no matter how urgent the problem, if your rent is overdue and you're going to get evicted on the 31st of December, I can still manage to sort of not think about it for those confined days. And I think Kieran is like something like that for the narrator, is that she sort of made an internal bargain that as long as she can be physically with him or know that he loves her, then she'll allow herself not to feel this agony that otherwise sort of occupies pretty much every other moment of her life, because she doesn't, she has no healthy relationship with herself, so she can't exist without without discomfort, but he allows her. And there's nothing special about Kieran that he's able to give her that relief. It's just a sort of, as I say, a sort of truce that she's struck with herself, that if this one thing works, then the other things can be left aside for the moment. And that's obviously what's so dangerous about the relationship then, is that because if you put the entirety of, the pressure of the entirety of your life onto one other person, then of course every interaction is going to be fraught, and any disagreement is going to feel absolutely terrifying and make you cry and argue and just totally panic. So I think that's part of why their interactions are so, it's kind of frustrating when I reread it sometimes, thinking like, oh my God, it's not that deep, just leave the apartment for half an hour. But obviously there's the reason that she does behave so, really overreacts to things and behaves quite irrationally, is that she's placed the burden of her entire, emotional balance on this working out. So that's, it's sort of fair enough in a way that she does behave like that.
Yeah. And I love the analogy with Christmas. I'm totally with you on that. I'm exactly the same. It's like that one time in the year when you can just forget about everything else and concentrate on that and being with people you love and all the things that go around that. And yeah, it does feel like that. I mean, it is almost like, it's this bubble, isn't it? And it's going to burst at some point. But for that period of time, she's in this bubble with him, isn't she? And with that comes this, this dependency, but also this type of control that she exercises in order to sustain that. And I think as I was reading the novel, it was very it was clear to me that that was manifesting itself in other ways as well. So yes, through the relationship with Kieran, but then in addition to that, and I suppose as ways for her to be able to, you know, survive or, you know, get by, there are other dependencies too, and other ways she controls her life. You know, there is references to alcohol abuse, there's the eating disorder, and then there are the rituals she creates, you know, on the Saturday afternoon ritual, the Friday evening ritual. So I wondered if you could say a little bit more about those aspects of dependency and control in the novel, and how they, you know, how they help or how they detract actually from her degree of self-help.
Yeah, it's interesting that especially the rituals part that you mentioned, because you know that is the sort of the healthy nice to have your life often, you know, the sorts of things that she's doing on the Friday and Saturday, sort of things that we all do, but they power for her, and they sort of mean something almost religious to her, that she has to go and do them in the same way, and in a way it's like a little bit what's the thing, doing the thing over and over again and expecting a different result, you know, where she thinks that if she does her like Saturday afternoon ritual pretty, and she's like making enjoyable chit chat with the waiter at the cafe, then this little performance will eventually become reality. And the same with, you know, like on her Friday nights with Kieran, when she's looking at this the pictures of his ex-girlfriend when he's out of the house, and she feels that if she looks at these pictures enough times, she'll understand something, and there'll be a breakthrough, and that she'll kind of have some definitive answer, you know, and she keeps on comparing herself to the girl in the photograph, and it's this ritual of going back and comparing, and it's really, you know, it's obviously a very futile little practice that she's built up, but it feels meaningful to her, and it feels like it will bear fruit eventually. But yeah, I think that the eating and the drinking, it's so exacerbated her control issues with those things when they do interact with Kieran, when he, because he's like he's a judgmental person, and he's a pure kind of puritanical person in some ways, or he has a lot of disgust. So I guess like the food stuff and the drinking especially, and then eventually sex as well, like when she's unfaithful to him, like these are all things that she feels shame about herself, and yet when he sort of encroaches on them, she reacts by amping them up, or doing them in front of him, or you know, being reckless about them. So obviously, even though they are behaviors that she is troubled by to some degree, she also values the sort of ability, the freedom to make the mistakes that she chooses, and when that's restricted, obviously she really can't handle it, and reacts very, very dramatically against that.
Yeah, I mean, I wondered, you know, whether that is to do with the fact that she knows. I mean, she knows that this relationship isn't going to last forever, and whether hanging on to these things are giving her the things that she can control in that moment, and the things that she knows she will still have once this is over, you know. So it's kind of like holding on to those things. It's, you know, and all interconnected with that sort of obsessive nature that she has, that she's got scraps of things, however, you know, however negatively they impact upon her, that she's able to hold on to these scraps of things to give her some sense of identity, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's it's sadly very true of drinking, I think, for a lot of people, because anybody who has a sort of start that relationship, teenager, you know, young teenager, and it's a relationship that, you know, goes on longer than a lot of the transient ones you have in your life. So then, you know, it does, as you're saying, it becomes a sort of identifier that you can use to feel like yourself when you feel otherwise adrift or cut off from things. And I think she definitely has that with all of the things that we mentioned, but especially with drinking. But I think, and eventually I think the sex comes to really signify that she's looking to feel like herself again, and she feels that a way to do that is through sleeping with a lot of people, and to be free to do that. And these are all things that I mean, it's interesting because like food, alcohol, and sex are all things that, you know, they're sort of quite key to everyone's life, a lot of people's lives, and they're not bad things. Like you could never say that they're inherently bad things. And so it's not that as though you could say, and she's wrong to want to eat or to drink or to have sex, but I think for lack of any other structure in her life, those three things and their signifying meaning as her, you know, as showing herself to herself, I think they come to totally dominate her personality in a way that is not ultimately sustainable, really.
Yeah, it's those extremes, isn't it, that she manifests. And I think that you also there are other ways that you incorporate other stories, other references within the novel about extreme forms of behavior. And I'm thinking in particular of the story of Karl Tanzler, which absolutely shocking story within the novel. Would you like to say a little bit about that and the reasons why you decided to include it?
Yeah, so this was a story that I had heard on an episode of This American Life years and years ago, and it was a doctor who I can't remember exactly the year, but I think it was the early 1900s maybe. But anyway, he was a doctor quite well off, and he treated an impoverished young woman for tuberculosis, and he fell in love with her, and she didn't have. I mean, she could barely. She was very ill, so she certainly didn't reciprocate. But her family sort of tolerated his attentions because they hoped that he would save her. And then when she died, he stole her body, her corpse, from the grave and took it to his house, and he sort of ham-fistedly embalmed it at home and kept her body there and sort of lavished all this, you know, I mean, obviously it's disgusting in every way, but this sort of very cliched romantic attention on it, you know, like dressed her up and put flowers all around her body and sort of did all this did this kind of big romantic overture basically to this woman's corpse, and then kept it in his house for years. And it sort of became a famous story for its grotesque nature and as an illustration of how mad his unrequited love sent him, you know. And I think I included it because I was thinking a lot at the time about because Kieran is the sort of obvious, the more obvious villain of the book, but both of them obviously have so many flaws and do terrible things to each other. And I was thinking a little bit about how much she tries to override Kieran's boundaries, and you know, he, regardless of your opinion on him, he makes himself quite clear at the beginning and says he doesn't want a relationship and he's not going to fall in love, and she ignores that and sort of barrels on and browbeats him into love. So I think I was thinking about that sort of aggression of you know, refusing to be told no, and to not even, so in the case of Karl Tanzler, like not even letting death itself stop you from trying to fantastic and fabricated love story for yourself. So I think I included it for that reason. And also, when I was writing the book, I didn't have any idea, A, if it would be published, and B, if I would ever publish another. So I think I was sort of, in a not entirely professional way, I was sort of just putting in anything I found interesting and like trying to stitch together different areas of interest. So it was maybe a little bit of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, but absolutely, it's you know, it functions within your story as a way of really highlighting the different forms of extreme behavior that people will go to, all in the name, you know, of love. You know, love being their ultimate consolation, as it is for your narrator. I wanted to kind of move a little bit away from her relationship with Kieran, to talk about some of the other relationships in the novel and the different ways that they sustain her otherwise. And I'm thinking in particular of the relationship with her father and with her friend Lisa and with her mother. Would you like to say a little bit more about those particular relationships for her and what they mean to her?
Yeah, I think that initially when I started writing the book, I wasn't really sure how many other characters there would be, and whether it should very literally just be her and Kieran, or if there should be other people. And eventually I started thinking about, especially with her father, the idea of somebody who she knows that if he could see the truth about what was going on, she knows exactly how disturbed and upset he would be. And I was interested in the idea of that sort of really intimate relationship between her father and herself, and then how that actually ends up functioning as creating distance, because they're so close. She can't let him see what's happening to her, and therefore it has to sort of put him out to a degree, or at least sort of put the relationship on ice a little bit. But I wanted there to be someone like that, and Lisa functioned in a not dissimilar way as like people in her life that they're hopeful. They're like hopeful figures in a way, because a little bit like you were saying about the drinking, but in a positive way. They're these people who were around before Kieran, and they'll be there when he's gone. So she doesn't want to get rid of them, but their love is sort of so painful because it would hurt them to see the truth that she also can't really engage with them anymore. And I think with her mother, there's a lot of anger towards her mother because of this sort of very classic mother-daughter stuff that happens for a lot of teenager girls and their mothers, where it's just sort of a lot of feminine energy under one roof at sometimes. Yeah. And I think that they've got a troubled past to some degree, but then her mother is. I really wanted her to have good parents, and I didn't want it to be a case of, I think it would be very easy to be like, she's so unhappy because she's got these awful family members, or she had a very barren childhood or something. But I really wanted her to have good parents, and her mother, despite any issues of that nature that she has with her, she is a totally stabilizing and unconditional presence in her life. And when she is home for Christmas and has that feeling of being safe at Christmas, it's about being there with her mother as well, and having that sense that there's something that will never change. And with Kieran, like every interaction, as we were saying, is so fraught and so conditional and laden with meaning, and the chance that it might all end any second. And so I guess it was important to have those characters who were the opposite of that in a way, and would allow themselves to be, to some degree a little bit rejected by the narrator, and sort of put aside for this guy who's so worthless really to her. And there are people who will tolerate that and still be around afterwards. And I think it would have been too bleak a book if there wasn't that sense that she does have people who truly love her in the right way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that the fact that I think it's bleak enough, isn't it, that she will focus on Kieran, and that those people are very much on the sidelines. And there are those really, really tender moments where she says, for example, that Lisa is the only person with whom she can talk about the truth, and yet Lisa is no longer there, and her father can save her from everything but from herself. But that is there sitting on the sidelines waiting for her to take it. And I guess that is really that's a very comforting thing in a book, which is about someone on this real path to potentially self-destruction because of the obsessive nature of their behavior, and their obsessive nature with their focus on this one particular man. I thought it was really interesting too in terms of place and Waterford, and when she goes back to Waterford, because it seemed to me there was a little bit of ambivalence in terms of her reactions to Waterford. So on the one hand, you had her father and her family and so on, but then she also talks about encountering a misshapen version of her true self when she's there. So could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that I definitely always find that when I'm home after a long stretch away, I sort of automatically value I had visited, and what I've done, failed to do, and it's all sort of time of accounting. And for her, she's in this almost palpable physical discomfort in her life where nothing really sits well. And I think going home, all the sort of coping mechanisms that she employs in Dublin in her adult life seem to fall short, I think, when she gets back to Waterford. And like, I guess, yeah, there's like no space for her to evade that sort of confrontation with herself, because she has this very strong connection to her home and to the people there, and it just feels less possible to fabricate stuff when she's there, I think. And I definitely experienced that when I moved away from home for the first time, is that you can get away with a lot of bluster away from your family and away from your home, and then it all sort of can fall away very quickly when you get back. I think she's experiencing that sort of being seen through, getting found out a little bit.
Yeah, it's grounding for her, isn't it? And also it's her away from Kieran. It's in a different space, in a different context with different people, and it is much more grounding for her. Yeah, definitely. And like you say, she can't hide behind the bluster or anything whenever she's there, can't she?
Yeah.
I loved the way you developed the sort of the trajectory of her relationship with Kieran, and taking us all the way up to May 2015 by the end. And by the time we get there, she is finding happiness in simple things, isn't she, without giving too much away. And she is still questioning herself, but it's a much more calm sort of questioning of herself. But I thought it was fascinating the way that you didn't actually leave her in 2015, but throughout the novel, you've intersected it with fragments from 4 years on, from Athens in 2019. And in those parts, she still has memories of Kieran. Of course she does. She still is talking about how home makes her feel. She still has questions about love. So I was wondering, why did you decide to structure the novel in that way and take us a little bit further beyond 2015 through those fragments?
Yeah, it was initially it was just that I wanted there to be some room for her to have reflected on her behavior, and the suggestion that she did eventually escape that totally singular mindset. And then it was sort of a question of do you it would have been maybe quite easy to make her absolutely self autonomous and happy and liberated, and now that she's gotten rid of Kieran, sort of everything went great for her. And I decided that I didn't quite want to do that. Like, I wanted her to have what I can. It's apparently quite divisive about how people read the ending. I think it's a happy ending, but some other people seem to read it a bit differently. But yeah, so I wanted her to be in a place where you could sense her freedom and her being on the precipice of an even greater freedom, and she's about to go and find the world for herself. But I didn't want to suggest that things had sort of very neatly wrapped up and she had stopped thinking about Kieran, immediately broke up, or the relationship hadn't wounded her, or that she had somehow magically instantly stopped needing attention from men. I wanted all those things to be shown to continue, but to have changed substantially, and on their way to changing even more, I think.
Yeah. I mean, as I say, for me it was a calm, and it was a kind of, okay, this is okay now. I haven't got all the answers, but it's okay. So I found it really refreshing, actually, that she still, as we all do, that she still had questions, that she was still looking back, that she was still trying to unravel things a long time afterwards, which makes sense to me, given that she was in such an obsessive state, in her bubble for, in which everything about that was her world at that time. And to disconnect her from that completely wouldn't have made sense to me. So I thought the ending was hopeful. Absolutely. I was wondering, Megan, before we finish, I think it would be really lovely for the audience to hear just a little bit more of her voice, if you don't mind reading a section for us.
I'll do a little bit. It kind of touches on what we spoke about her her not manipulation necessarily, but her eroding of his boundaries. So that the part that I'll read is a little bit about when once they're living together, her subtle and kind of gradual ability to make him dependent on her, and how she goes about doing that. I wonder now at my desperation to perform domestic acts for him. I wanted more than anything to present him with the products of my labor, for him to see how invested I was in maintaining our life, how joyfully invested. I was even happy when I baked him a cake or cooked a meal which he would then ignore or eat without thanks. I was happy when I washed a jacket of his which stank, unbeknownst to him, of cigarettes and weed. I was happy, I smiled, I sang, when I scrubbed the toilet on my knees. The bleach smelled strong and delicious and burned the bloody creases I had bitten into my fingers and thumbs. I wrote out meal plans and stuck them to the fridge with hearts and smiley faces and stars doodled around each neat entry, stretching weeks into the future. Comforting to know already that we would eat a lamb kofta salad a month in advance. How sweet to determine our faraway actions so precisely. I wanted, I suppose, for him to need me without knowing that it was me that he needed at all. I wanted him to live in a world where each need he might have had been preemptively filled. No button left unsewn, no white collar still ringed with browning sweat when he needed it clean. That's why I didn't need thanks. I didn't curse the absence of praise. There was to be a whole functioning ecosystem surrounding him, and he would have no cause to worry or try, no cause to question anything at all. And it's easy to disappear beneath the incessant cycle of chores necessary to keep a pleasant and clean home. Women who once were individuals despair of being made into nothing more than wife, housekeeper, mother, a person whose identity is secondary to their ability to make things easier for everyone else. But I was not a mother, doing everything for one other person, one man. In the heated flush of those first months we lived together, it felt sexy and intimate and even profound. Was there even some feeling of mine that the whole dynamic was coated in a dusting of irony? Did that make it easier? The ludicrous idea of myself as a person who fetched slippers and roasted pork and made cold drinks for the big tall man in his overcoat, smelling of outside evening, of real life, that I was not a part of. It was so absurdly at odds with the way I had lived before. But I wanted it then. I remember the wanting, the greed for it, leaving work early so I would have time to prepare great midweek multi-course feasts, making his life into a production, a lively play of domesticity, too loud to hear anything over. And when I was tired from it all and wanted to cry because I got something wrong, or when he offered to help me, those were the few times I would become really angry with him. No, I would say, you just stay there and I'll take care of it. Meaning you just stay there and I'll take care of you. If he got something out of me, I was taking something from him too. I was taking away his ability to live without me. I subbed his rent, I cooked his food, I cleaned his clothes, so that one day soon there would come a time when he would no longer remember how he could ever have done without me. I would not imagine doing so ever again.
Oh, huge thanks, Megan. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you today.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. I had a great time too. Thank you.
It's been absolutely fascinating, and huge thanks to JLF as well for hosting our conversation today. Megan, many congratulations again on the book, and I wish you all the very best with it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan and Elaine, for that fascinating conversation. This session is presented by the Embassy of Ireland. And thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. Please stay logged on to continue to watch with us the series of exciting sessions featuring a stellar list of speakers that have been specially curated for you. Sessions are ongoing across all three of our venues, Frontlawn, Mughal Tent, and Darbar Hall. Stay tuned for our next session.